The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we have a very special guest. We actually have a war member who's wrecking face with World Eaters. He's completely coming out of the new meta here, and he's got a really awesome list that features a really exciting Lord of Skulls, which, you know, everybody loves the Lord of Skulls. I'm pleased to announce Daniel Harrison. Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me here. Been a long-time listener, and I'm just really excited to be here.
I know, that's awesome. I love that we can actually have gotten to a point where longtime listeners are finally making it to the podcast as their own super major and GT winners and things like that. That's really cool. What has that journey been like for you?
Oh, it's been absolutely crazy. So I started playing Warhammer at the start of 9th edition with the Indomitus box. I played against John in my first super major right when I was starting to play, and he was by far like the best opponent I had at LVO. He absolutely wrecked me, but it was the most fun that I ever had playing Warhammer, and he taught me so much, and that's what got me into the War Room, where I just kept learning more tricks and more about Warhammer and the competitive aspect, as well as just the strategy involved that you guys teach in the War Room. Really just strengthened my connection with the game, and there was so much that I didn't realize that I was missing out on in the hobby.
That's awesome. I love that journey, you know, right? Like coming through the podcast and playing John, and then just getting involved in the war from there. I mean, that's like, in from our perspective, that's a dream story. But how did you get from, you know, fumbling through Warhammer with the Indomitus box at the beginning in 9th to like playing the tournaments and then winning tournaments? Obviously, the War Room helps, but like, what's that journey been like for you?
Really just falling in love with the models and with the whole play system of 40K and playing with people in person. I mean, I've been playing video games since I was very young. My dad was in computers, so as early as I can remember, I was on a computer playing video games. And I used to play Magic the Gathering growing up. And I went into the shop, and I'd always see people playing 40K and thinking, man, that is so cool. And when the pandemic happened, I really had time to sit down and learn it, because everything going on with the pandemic. So once I started to learn it, I realized how much this really fit me as a person, and showing up to games in person is just a whole other thing than playing online. I found that the online toxicity is just so extreme, and in my experience, I've seen almost none of that in 40K. Every game that I play, we're sitting down to have fun, because we're playing with toy soldiers at the end of the day. So we're taking this huge investment in our time to just have a good time. And winning is not the most important thing. It's just having a good time. And so that whole atmosphere around 40K is really what drove me to continue to play, continue to learn, to meet new people, to broaden my horizons. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. Just the community is ultimately what keeps us all here. At least for myself, I can say that. I mean, I've been playing for 20 plus years, and at this point, I've made like lifelong friends through this hobby. And like every time I go to the tournaments, I see people I've seen up and coming, new faces, and people I've known for years. And it's just like such an amazing mix, and it's very positive. I'm really proud of that element. So I'm glad that can be like some of your motivation to actually keep improving, getting better. So kind of going through a little bit further into your player journey, talking about your trip at the Rocky Mountain Open, which you actually won first place in.
Second.
That's actually going to be what we're focusing in today's conversation. I got a little bit ahead of myself. But part one of the show is going to be about Daniel and his Rocky Mountain journey and his amazing World Eaters list with the Lord of Skulls, and how it all kind of works at a strategic level, what the play styles are and that kind of thing. And then part two, which is going to be for our patrons on AOW40k.com. You can subscribe and get access to it. We will talk about the games. We'll talk about the in-depth tactical minutia, the pile-ins, the consolidates, the target priority. Like, how do you actually make a Lord of Skulls work and win majors with it? That's all the super exciting stuff, and that's what Daniel's going to share his knowledge with in part two for our patrons. You also get access to our Discord channel, where you have amazing access to the coaches and the rest of the Worm community, which Daniel has credited to his success here, so you definitely don't want to miss any of that. But Daniel, I want to talk about your play style now. What brought you to World Eaters? Where'd that come from?
Just want to correct you real quick. So I didn't technically win. I went undefeated, so I got second, but I didn't win Rocky Mountain Open.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that correction.
No, that's all right. But War Leaders, what brought me to War Leaders is I always enjoyed Chaos. Death Guard was actually the first faction that I picked up, but they were just so slow. And I wanted Blood Angels was my second faction that I picked up, and I really liked the maneuverability there. And then when they released Codex War Leaders, I saw it, and I was immediately like, this is me to a T. This is my play style. I love it. It's Chaos, first of all, and it's fast and fun. And 9th edition War Leaders was by far my favorite army to play, hands down. 10th is still a lot of fun, but I feel like they just nailed the whole theme of the army in 9th, and that's what really got me excited to play it, because as many of you are probably familiar with 9th World Leaders, they got stronger as units died. So I was cheering for my opponent to kill my stuff. So I was having a great time when they were killing my stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that whole theme of, Khorne cares not from where the blood flows just was so much fun, because I love cheering for my opponent too. Seeing them have a good time makes me have a good time. So it's not all about winning, and I think World Leaders fits that really well, because I'm just here for some blood.
So you just knew World Leaders were your play style based on their kind of approach to the game and what they're here for.
Exactly. And then with my past experiences with Death Guard being my first Chaos army, and then Blood Angels, just fusing them together just was right up my alley.
So one thing that Blood Angels and Death Guard and almost every other faction in the game have is a shooting phase, or at least access to a shooting phase. And World Leaders largely skipped that, except for your Lord of Skulls, which I noticed does kind of bring a shooting element to your army. Is that like its purpose? Is that like why you think it's kind of necessary in that role, or is this like a snowflake type of thing?
No, absolutely. The Lord of Skulls and then the Helbrutes as well bring just a little bit of shooting to clear up screens.
I'm sorry, did you just say Helbrutes?
Yes.
There's Helbrutes in this army.
I brought 2 Helbrutes in this army, which I don't think I've ever seen in a competitive list before. I
can't hide this any longer. You got to tell us, what is the list you actually took to this tournament?
Okay. So we'll starting at the top. We have Angron himself, because no World Leaders list is complete without Angron. We have a Demon Prince with wings, World Leaders, Lord on Juggernaut, and both of those have no enhancements. We've got 2x10 Jakhals, 1 unit of 6 8-bound, the Khorne Lord of Skulls himself, 2x2 Spawn, and then 2 Helbrutes with Multi-Melta and Heavy Flamer and Fist.
Okay, you've got to walk me through this. We've had a variety of World Leaders players on the show before. We've had Anthony Vanilla, we've had Jack Harpster, we've even had Jack talking about the Lord of Skulls. But we have not had Helbrutes. This is a brand new take on World Leaders. There's fewer 8-bound squads than I'm used to seeing. There's more Spawn. There's Helbrutes. Need I say again? What is going on here?
So I've been playing World Leaders competitively starting last year, and this year with 10th coming out, I started with the Khorne Lord of Skulls. So even before this last balance patch, I was playing the Khorne Lord of Skulls. I brought him to LVO. I did all right there, but I took some learnings from that and really changed my list around to help support the Khorne Lord of Skulls, because I just love the model. It is quintessential 40K model, the Khorne Lord of Skulls. It's just awesome and terrible at the same time, and I love it.
That's super exciting. Oh my god, I like the fact that you played Lord of Skulls before. It was kind of meta. If this is even considered meta, is really exciting. But what about these Helbrutes? Like, what are they giving you to your faction? Like, if you could paint like how this army's play style is, like, what is its strategy for the game?
Okay, so it's sort of a stat check. Going into the tournament, I was expecting to go 5-1, because essentially it's a skew list. Everything is tough, everything is durable, and I'm just trying.
You just embrace that. Like, you're like, I expect to go 5-1. It is a stat check. Let's call it what it is. Like, that's not, most players try to sugarcoat it and make it pretty, but you're like, no, this is what it is.
No, exactly. That's what I was there for. In my mind, I was going into it thinking, hey, if my goal was 5-1 here, if I go 5-1, I'm going to be happy. 4-2, like I'll be a little sad, but that's kind of what I was expecting. I honestly had no idea or even expectation of going 6-0 with this list, and it was just a phenomenal run.
That is really fascinating, Daniel. I mean, most players, when they come on the podcast, they've been chasing it for a long time, or they've been, made it to, repetitive super major wins and such. There's like an expectation or a belief that they're going to do well. Everyone has tough tournaments, and you can't win them all, but they're really expecting to do pretty well. And you're coming in pretty humble, like expecting to go 4-2, maybe 5-1.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I absolutely want to go 6-0. I mean, that's been a goal of mine for forever. But the game of 40K, there's so many dice involved. You can set yourself up for success, have secondaries, with tertiary plans, and sometimes the dice just don't help you. So realistically, you need to go into every tournament thinking, hey, only one or two people here are going to win.
No, it's a very good mindset to have about it, because it's super hard. And it's unreliable still, even if you're amazing at the game, to get super consistent results. It is just there's a random element, and there's not an extra amount of rounds in tournaments to account for that. So if you just have a bad game, you have a bad game. But, tournament theory aside, it's pretty impressive to go from the 4-2, 5-1 ceiling, which so many players find themselves at, and then punch through to that 6-0 kind of unexpectedly. That's not a story you hear very often. What did that feel like? And how did you kind of go through it?
It was absolutely unreal. I mean, when my opponent conceded the sixth game, I was shaking. Like I didn't really know how to internalize what just happened. I almost didn't believe it. Like I couldn't put it into words at the time of how exciting, how thrilling that was for this years-long journey to finally culminate in something that I honestly wasn't even expecting to happen then. I thought, I'm gonna grind out this year. Maybe next year will be my year, and I'm just gonna put in some practice. I'm gonna have some fun, and I'm gonna throw some dice. And then for it to shake out the way that it did was just a tremendous feeling of accomplishment.
I'm so happy to hear that, Daniel. That is really, really exciting. Kind of brings me back to the first couple times I saw awesome tournament success, and it was, it's a really amazing moment to see the culmination of your efforts actually manifesting themselves into something real. But to bring us back to the list a little bit, it's a stat check. But does that mean like we're deploying on the line and just hoping we go first, running at them stat check, or is there a methodology here?
Oh, absolutely not. Given I play World Eaters so different than I see so many other people play World Eaters. And I think it goes back to my time playing GSC, where I null deploy turn one almost every time. I let my opponent know, hey, I can still reach out and touch your deployment zone turn one because of my scout with the 8 bound. And then Angron, turn one, can move 22 and then charge. So even with me null deploying, I still have a way to reach out and touch you. So then that causes my opponent to play back more and open up the board space more. And so playing in the first turn a little bit defensive extends my time on the board. Because again, it's a stat check. And while the overall damage in 40K is relatively low to what we've seen like in 9th edition, I'll still get tabled. But I want to buy myself as much time as possible. And I do that by threat projecting.
So you basically take a more like a staging turn one, basically, and a staging deployment zone where you're deploying defensively, still projecting crazy threat. Your deployment deploys a little further back so they don't get attacked and charged turn one by your potential 2 advance and charge. Use strats for auto 6 advance and then charge somebody. And then use that turn one to just kind of get up the table and position yourself behind line of sight. Is that the idea?
Exactly. And that's if the opponent, respects World Eaters enough to sit back, because if they deploy on the line, I will go out and I will get them turn one. If they're giving me good pieces, good trades early on, I will absolutely take that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of World Eaters player doesn't charge?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially with the Khorne Lord of Skulls, the ability to get Angron back is so much higher with him and Jakhals that I am not afraid to throw Angron away turn one to pick up a screen.
So what is the whole unit breakdown you have here? Like, why is this different to all the other World Eaters lists? I mean, it seems like not Anthony Vanilla's 1975 Jack's World Eaters Lord of Skulls version. They just take the same kind of data sheets in repetition, and like maybe some combo characters like the Master of Executions and Khorne Berzerkers. But you're just going for a more variety vehicle base and spawn and things.
Yeah, so like I said early on, it was a SKU list. It was intended to be a SKU list with the Khorne Lord of Skulls and Angron taking advanced positions turn 2, and really committing turn 2 on most games, and then allowing those Helbrutes to trundle up the field. Advancing, usually moving +2, but still taking a couple of turns to get to your opponent. But they're safe out in the open there because they're not priority number 1. And normally in a lot of other World Eaters lists, where Angron's your only big thing, after they kill Angron, all of their Meltas, all of their anti-tank can pick up Helbrutes quite easily. Having the Khorne Lord of Skulls and Angron eats all of that anti-tank, so there's nothing left for those Helbrutes, so that means they can make it to late game. And then once they get into combat, because of their special ability, or your opponent's shooting phase, when there's not a lot of activations left on the field, turn 4 and 5, you really see them shine.
What is a World Eaters Hellbrute? Maybe that's where my disconnect is coming, because I see that thing and I'm like a Dreadnought with a multi-melta wandering around the board, but like clearly you're like valuing this thing. What is this thing doing?
All right, so going through the sheet for World Eaters Hellbrute here: base move 6, T9, a 2-up armor, 8 wounds, and 3 OC. And then its special ability is Frenzy. Each time an enemy unit targets this model, after that unit has finished making its attacks, this model can either shoot as if it were the shooting phase or fight as if it were the fight phase. So that means in my opponent's shooting phase that they better kill that in one go, or I'm going to get some free Melta shots off.
Right, and that can always just turn into a lot of damage all of a sudden.
Yes, and then also in combat, if they charge me and attack me first, what I can do is I can then trigger its shooting, because the vehicle can shoot into combat, and then I can shoot, and then later select it to activate to fight.
Oh, wow. So it's if they attack you, you get to just attack back again instantly.
Yes.
Wow, that's super strong. And then what's their combat profile like?
So their combat profile, with the fist that I chose, is base 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 12, -2, 3 damage. So it's not amazing, but then you start stacking World Eaters buffs on there. You sustained hits in range of Angron or the 8-bound, and then you're re-rolling stuff. And then having an extra activation always helps too, because your opponent is also required to attack you back. So even if you charge the Hellbrute into a Rhino, and you don't quite kill that Rhino in one go, that Rhino has to punch you back. So then that activates Frenzy, and then you can attack again.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So I can see how you can pretty much just leverage these things to get multiple activations to make up for their relatively unimpressive stat line. But it's still an effective stat line. Like strength 12, AP2, 3 damage, hits. Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, I mean, it's World Eater, so it's on the low end of hitting.
The low end of the World Eaters is like higher than anything in my Demon Codex. You don't rub it in.
And then that's the other thing is the mobility that World Eaters provides to the Helbrute too. Because like I said, so it's a base 6 move. If you select the +2 move, then you're moving 8 inches. If you can then also advance and charge with it, or just advance it. So it's base move 6 +2, and then you could advance it. So those first turn or two moving up the field, you can really get it forward and apply that pressure where you can't do that with many of the other Helbrutes.
Absolutely. It's much faster than a normal Hellbrute. I'm surprised it's a Helbrute though. Like if I'm thinking of a vehicle, why not a Mauler Fiend or something?
I was toying around with that as well. Granted, first I don't own any Mauler Fiends, but
That's a great reason.
I was certainly willing to go out and get a couple. But the base size for a Mauler Fiend is larger and it's more points. So it does move faster. I know some other players have experienced some success with that. But most of the time, anything that they charge into, they're both going to kill the same stuff. And the Helbrute is cheaper, and its profile on the board is smaller, so it's easier for me to hide. Because, like I said, I like to null deploy turn 1, and having these two big monstrosities, such as Angron and the Khorne Lord of Skulls, eats up a lot of that hiding space. So having that small footprint for those Helbrutes is perfect.
So hiding on Angron and a Lord of Skulls, and then hiding even more stuff, is hiding this army is not easy. These are big models that are like not fly. Even if you can hide them completely from like real firepower, they're going to be pretty far back in a lot of cases. Like the ruins might be in the corner of your deployment zone. Is that a sacrifice you're willing to make?
Well, so we were using player play terrain at the Rocky Mountain Open, so that allowed me the opportunity to set up areas on the line where they were going to be safe for the most part, unless my opponent wanted to come extremely far forward to get that line of sight and shoot them. And if they did, it was one or two things that could reach them, and then they're within easy strike distance of me with my +2 move, advance and charge. So it was really sort of bait. And that actually did happen one of the games where they got a line on the Khorne Lord of Skulls turn 1 and killed them before I even got to go. But we'll get into that in part 2. Don't want to spoil anything.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very excited because there's always going to be a game in the tournament when the stat check didn't work, and somehow you still won that one. I'm excited to hear about that. But
it was a wild game.
It's a wild game, yeah, I'm sure. But, that's for part 2 and all our patrons. So if you're not a patron, great time to subscribe. Talk to me about this Demon Prince and this Lord on Juggernaut. What are these doing here?
So the Demon Prince was a holdover from the previous iteration of my list pre-nerf, where he would take the Berzerker Glaive. I know a lot of people used to put the Berzerker Glaive on the Master of Executions, but I really loved it on the Demon Prince in its old iteration, because it was the most effective tool to dealing with a Catan, because it would go from flat 3 damage, you half it down to 2, and then you would add the modifier of what you roll. So you could potentially do 5 damage to a Catan shard with him, which is more than the Lord of Skulls or Angron can do in combat to a Catan. So that's why I had that as a holdover, as well as something to deep strike. Having that ability to force my opponent to screen really helped spread them out and prevent them from applying all the pressure they can at one time to either the Angron or Khorne Lord of Skulls.
And then it's another tough model in your army, even when it's on the table. So it's like even more to deal with after you've dealt with Angron, after you're trying to deal with Lord of Skulls. There's Helbrutes now. This guy's in your face. I can see that. Are you rapid ingressing often?
Every game. Every game it's a rapid ingress. Because he moves so fast, you can put him relatively safe. Or you can just mess up your opponent's plan. If they're lining stuff up to shoot at Angron or Khorne Lord of Skulls or both, you drop them in, and then it adds another layer of complexity to your opponent's thought process, and then you might get them to split fire. So then instead of killing Angron or the Lord of Skulls, they put some shots into the Demon Prince, and they kill nothing.
It's also really easy to underestimate how durable a Demon Prince is. I've played with them a few times, and people don't commit nearly enough to kill them, and he just lives.
Oh, absolutely. And its ability to pick one thing as its oath target, reroll hits and wounds, allows me to pick out a targeted threat and rapid ingress and go kill that thing and trade up in points more often than not. I was a little disappointed in his performance without the Berzerker Glaive, because getting that extra damage on its sweep profile is very nice, and I missed that a couple of times. So I might play around with changing the list, dropping him for some Terminators in the next iteration on the list.
Interesting, to just still have that deep strike threat, but a different type of unit coming in.
Yes. I feel like they will do more damage, and they just offer more wounds in totality.
So it's interesting you say that, because when I play my Demon Prince, I'm always frustrated that he's strength 8, and then you playing World Eaters obviously gets him up to strength 9, which helps, but it's not like earth shattering. So I was surprised to see you using him. I was curious what kind of targets he typically goes after. But then the other part of that is that he's so much faster than Terminators. That's an interesting kind of swap.
So the World Eaters Demon Prince, on his strike profile, so his big swing with fewer attacks is actually base strength 10. And then you get to go up to strength 11 on the charge.
Must be nice.
Yeah, exactly. So he really does swing into a lot of things very well. with 3 damage, especially Terminators. I mean, I know Terminators aren't all that popular in the meta right now, but having that 3 damage option is nice, and I feel like I would miss that if I went to Terminators.
I think the Prince is a really cool addition as well. What about this Lord on a Juggernaut? What's he doing for you?
So he is just a cheap character. In my opinion, he's one of the best cheap characters we have, because it's even a Master of Execution that's now 100 points. So is Khorne the Betrayer, but having the World Leader's Lord on Juggernaut is 100 points and has more mobility. It's also relatively tough and harder to kill than people think, because it's T6, has a 2-up armor save, 7 wounds, and a 4-up invuln. And then it'll do charge mortals, and has quite a bit of attacks. It has 7 with its Exalted chainblade, and then 4 on its mount. And then the ones on the mount also have lance. So it's a very good skirmish piece. Sorry. So it's very good at skirmishing and picking up small units, and then being relatively durable still. Because again, a lot of anti-tank stuff is already going to other targets here. So if they're diverting shots into this character, that means the Lord of Skulls and Angron are going to have free rampage across the rest of the field. So this guy is usually going untouched. He can grab primary. He can go take skirmish units, and it's just a fantastic trade piece as the cheapest character in the list.
That's so interesting. I don't really think of solo characters as a cheap trade piece. I actually kind of assumed he would join the 8-bound usage, but why not just spring a little bit more points and get an 8-bound unit or an Exalted 8-bound unit or something to trade instead of his place, just because there's so much more tax?
Well, so my list was exactly 2,000 points, so I didn't have any points to spare. And then having another character around is also good on, what is that mission? Is that Sights of Power, where you need a character to... Yeah, so I was already kind of running low, especially with the Demon Prince being in reserves, Angron doing Angron things. I need something to be midfield and racking up points on that mission.
Point as well.
So I think he's good for that. And then he's just cheaper than an 8-bound unit, and basically does the same thing as an 8-bound unit, because he's 2 damage attacks. So he's going to go pick up Marines, the 5-man squads, like it's not a problem. And then also do charge wounds. So he was great in my Necrons game, doing a couple of extra mortals to a Catan shard, which really helped tip the balance there. And you don't get that from 8-bound.
Running around on his own, you don't find that he's a little just free to kill for your opponent if they dedicate any amount of effort, or does it just go back to that threat overload situation where you're just not dedicating effort to this man?
No, because again, he's tougher than you think he is. T6, right? 7 wounds with a 2-up armor and a 4-up invuln. So you get him in cover. They got to put something decent to go kill him. And if they're doing that, I love that, because then they're not going after Angron or the Lord of Skulls.
Right. So he kind of gets a free pass in those games.
Exactly. So he's sitting around usually till the late game, and really helping me win that trade war, because most of the other skirmish pieces, don't deal with toughness 6 pretty well.
That's cool. I really like the different pieces coming together in this army. So let's talk about the progressing that game state, just like on a strategic level again. You basically said you take the first couple turns to null deploy, hide behind terrain, and then stage. That's like deployment in turn 1. And then turn 2, your opponent's either playing very far back and just letting you run away with the game, or they're engaging you and doing that kind of thing. How do you progress the game from there? Like, what are you charging? What is your shooting priority? What is your target priority? Are you hitting all at once, piecemealing? What's the game from there?
So I picked tactical secondaries every single game. There are a couple where I considered doing fixed, like when they had a ton of vehicles, but I feel like tactical fits the army more, because I have so many trade pieces, I have so much trash to throw away. I kind of built it around doing tactical, and getting that extra CP really helped. So with that in mind, I'm sorry, what was the question again? I went on a little
It's all good.
Side note there.
Question is basically like after you've staged upon your opponent, how do you charge them and kill them, or like how do you progress the game state from there?
Yes. Oh, sorry. So that was my point. So I would follow tactical cards. So if they told me to do something, I would do that. And like you say in the war room all the time, is know the board state. So if they're sitting back and I am going to win, if they continue to sit back, I'm not going to do anything. I'm threat projecting, and I'm there to already win the game if I do absolutely nothing. So in that case, I would sit back. But if the game is still even, and they give me something to trade into, I'll start that trade war, and I'll try to do it in a way where they can have a limited response. So one of the games that I played was on stream on War Games Live. And in that game, what I did is I moved the Khorne Lord of Skulls up to have a lane to be shot at by the Grey Knights. However, it was only a single lane. So it was a bait for them to commit to one section of the board. I mean, it's Grey Knights, so they can always jump around, but still to commit to try to kill him. But I knew they weren't going to have enough with just one firing lane because their armigers were on the other side of the field. So forcing them to split fire into two different targets is kind of my goal in turns 2 and 3. Because most armies, even if they have enough to kill one of them, they usually don't have enough to kill both of them in one turn.
It makes a lot of sense. Basically, if you are going to break your defensive formation and kind of expose something for a trade, try to do it in a way where your opponent's response is limited, and beyond that limitation, try to make them go to a bad spot to actually take advantage of that shot.
Exactly.
So when you're trying to progress into that mid-game state, are you looking to keep this trade war going as long as possible? I know the macro scale, you're kind of evaluating the score, who's winning, who's losing, and if you're winning, obviously don't blow it. But in the situations where you are starting to get the game of Warhammer going, because it's obviously unclear that you're winning, is it like throw a spawn unit out and see what happens, or is it like once enough stuff comes out, everything comes out?
Oh, it's everything. It's full send. I'm playing World Leaders, baby. We're sending.
We're sending. I had a feeling.
So it's a threat overload list, right? So I'm trying to give them more things to think about, more things to shoot out and charge than they know what to deal with, and then whatever sneaks by, because there's so much high toughness thing in there, whether it's Spawn or Helbrutes or whatever, really leverage that to take as many points, deny my opponent as many points as possible, and score as many for myself. Because at the end of the day, that's how you win 40K. I, as a World Leaders player, love killing stuff. I love it. I love when my stuff dies. I love when their stuff dies. I love it. But I also have to remember score points.
I'm pretty surprised you don't take fixed more often, or like at all. I understand tactical cards gain you CP, which you can use to help brutalize your opponent. But it seems like you have so many different random levers that you need to figure out what they are before you can actually create a plan with your army. And by that, I mean you're drawing tactical cards, and then you yourself set your strategies to follow the cards. And then the other element to that is your Khorne Blessings roll, or whatever it's called. You don't necessarily know you're getting advance in charge, especially without the rerolls like you used to have. You don't know if Angron's coming back. So in that sense, it's very risky to play your army, right? And like you never have a foundation for what your plan could be.
Yes and no. So a lot of the for the Khorne rolls, a lot of the times I'm taking sustain hits and +2 move, which is very easy to get on the table. It's only when I need advance and charge that I'm really hoping for advance and charge. And to be honest with you, I don't take it that much. It's because the threat of having it is usually enough to keep people back a ways where it really impacts the game. So just having it as an option, because me not knowing it is the same as my opponent not knowing. So it's only when they go first and I have to roll my dice, then pick them before they take their turn. Then can they start to measure it out and really know what I'm capable of. And so that really hurts World Leaders. But for the most part, I don't think that it's too much to think about. And then the tactical cards just help the flow of the game, and then also help with CP. As Jack pointed out in the World Leaders review in the War Room, you all should check that out. The suite of stratagems for World Leaders is amazing. And having that CP when you need it is so big.
Yeah, I know. Jack and I have an ongoing joke between us where whenever I have a card I can score and I opt not to score it because I'd rather the CP. Even it's like 2 points on Investigate Signals. So I'm like, I'm gonna get a CP instead. I'm like, I look at Jack and he's like, I'm converting you. You know, he just does that like every game now.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's no other way for war leaders to get CP other than tactical.
Right. And like you said, your strats are just that good. So there's like a bit of an ebb and flow of knowing when to pitch a card that you can score versus score it. Do you just always score it? Do you always pitch it, or is there a choice there?
It really depends on the game state. It's hard to say. I think I only threw it away once when I could score this whole tournament in favor of the CP, and it's usually early game, but I still have some flexibility and I'm low on CP. But for the most part, I just try to get as many points as possible every game, because in almost every game that I played in this tournament, it came down to the wire. I know some of the scores don't reflect that, but these were all very, very, very close games.
Man, you're really making me excited for this part too, but I just have a few more questions before we get there. When you're playing this army, you have a lot to keep in mind, tactical cards, and then the combat minutia of the army as well as a whole element. Like there's the strategic level. When do I go with what? Where does it go? But then there's the pile-ins, the consolidates, the using this objective to launch a unit into a different spot. You know, all kinds of stuff we teach at the Warrior. But how much of that do you actually make use of when you're playing in a high-level tournament game and throughout the Super Major? Are you making
every game
like a part of every game?
Every single game. I mean, World Eaters, yes, I have the Khorne Lotus goals for some shooting, but combat is the most important. Movement is the most important thing. I mean, I can't say they're both the most important, but they really are. And those tips and tricks that you guys offer in the War Room about how to set up your movement, how to do your movement, and then the charge phase, the pilot and consolidates are huge. For instance, the game that was streamed, I leveraged the 8-bound to charge into one Nemesis Dread Knight, consolidate into another one that was already damaged with just one 8-bound, and then kill the one that I consolidated into with that single 8-bound. And well, I mean, I should have killed the first one that I piled into, but he made an ungodly amount of 4-ups, which happens. But in all reality, math says that I kill both of them. And when you're able to pick up those 2-for-1s, it is huge. I did a very similar thing in the last game I played against the Necron player, Tom, who's an amazing opponent, by the way, where I was able to charge his Locust Heavy Destroyer, and he had all 4 of them grouped up, a unit of 2 and 2 units of 1. I charged one of the Lone Man, was able to wrap it with my pile-in, and pick up all 4 of them with only charging one of them. So what I learned in the War Room, without that, I could not have won this tournament. This is an easy statement to make.
Daniel, it warms my heart to hear, and like I literally did not pay you to say that or anything. This is just you coming out and just saying that. I really appreciate that. So I'm so glad we could make such a great difference in your 40K success over here. I just have one question before we head on over to part 2, because I can hear you're so eager to tell us how you ripped your opponents limb from limb. Great corner view. If you had one piece of advice to give up and coming Warhammer players try to get better, what would it be?
Have fun. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. Winning, yes, like we all want to win, but don't let that be the driving force, your driving motivation, because it's so hard and so much luck is involved in going 6-0 with these large GT super majors, that your heart really needs to be in it. And if you're just there to win, you're not going to have a good time, because odds are you're not going to win every single one of your games. So just go and have a good time, because that's what we're all here for.
Beautifully said. Couldn't agree more. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast having you.
Nick, thanks so much for having me. It's a dream come true. It really is.
You are so welcome. I'm very eager to have you come over in part 2. We're going to talk about the games, the matchups, the actual minutia of how he moved and charged and got his games won. We're going to figure out what happened when the stat check didn't work and how he won anyway. Life's not all pretty and roses on the way to a super major victory, but Daniel's going to tell us exactly how he did it. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in competitive Warhammer, if you're interested in getting better, do check out our Patreon, AOW40k.com. It allows us to keep the lights on and keep producing this amazing content for you. Really helps our dreams come true and help Daniel win tournaments. So thank you so much for all of your support, ladies and gentlemen, and we will catch you next week.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.